Okay, so this meeting is being taped as it should be. Would you call attendance, please, Terry?
Sure. Yep. Mr. Collins,
Yeah, here.
Mr. Murphy,
Present.
and Miss Naylor.
Present.
Okay. The first agenda item is to vote to recommend to the full school committee that it approve the expenditure of $486,822 from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education for FY21 Secondary Virtual Course Access Grant.
Pat, can you take them through?
I'm going to defer to Lydia on this one.
Oh, okay.
So this grant is not only Springfield Public Schools, but it does have a portion on it for the empowerment zone. So I'm just going to speak for the Springfield Public Schools section of it. So this grant was by DESE to help us with our remote learning for our secondary schools. And so what we put in the grant was to add additional Edgenuity slots so that the kids not only remediate, but have an opportunity to accelerate. So any kid that wants to take a high school course has the opportunity. So we have enough licenses for that. We also put in for 1,000 license for a company called Paper. Paper is an online tutoring service that we've used in some of our schools in the past. And they are virtually 24/7 tutors that are available to our kids in just about every subject in English and in Spanish. And it has a portion in there for the teachers to actually see exactly what the kids were working on the tutor with. And it also shows them the exact work that the kids kind of put online. The teachers have the ability to also put their work with kind of like a pod, so the kids can then join a tutor and kind of help with that work. We also put money in for to expand the Nearpod. It is a platform that teachers have been using with their students already. And so we wanted to give additional opportunities for teachers to kind of do that. And then we put a portion in there to work with paraprofessionals all around the remote learning as it was designed for acceleration in the remote setting.
Okay. Are there questions from committee members?
No, thank you. Mr. Collins.
Latonia, you all set?
I'm all set.
Then is there a motion to recommend to the full committee that we spend the $486,822 from the DESE grant for virtual course access?
So moved. Sorry.
I'm not sure it was a tie, so.
I'll second.
Okay, there we if you call the roll, Terry. Terry, you're muted.
There we go. Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Attorney Murphy,
Yes.
and Miss Naylor.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, the second item is a vote to recommend to the full school committee that it approve the appropriation from the FY21 carryover funds in the amount of $3 million to fund school facility improvements. This one, I believe, is Pat, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, so we worked hard last year when COVID first hit to make sure we saved as much money as possible for carryover in order to make sure we balanced this year's budget, not knowing how the state budget was going to fall. We were able to generate $13 million in carryover, and our summer projects are a really big thing. When the schools are shut down, we get a lot of work done. So we'd like to use $3 million out of that $13 million towards the facility summer projects, and we'll still have carryover left to help us with any sort of budget balancing for next year's budget.
And so the projects are projects that I believe we've reviewed in the past, right? You had a priority list of projects that we reviewed a couple of years ago.
Yeah, so once our process is, once we have the dollar amount, I sit down with the facilities department and we go over, and we usually try to pick up to 10 schools to shut down for the summer. And we go through and we do painting and floor tiles and ceiling tiles and different upgrades like that. It's kind of different, and every one of our schools has been part of, we're on like a 10-year cycle where every school gets shut down at least once every 10 years. And so we just pick whatever schools are next on the list and which ones have the biggest upgrades that are needed.
So everybody gets a shot before somebody gets a second shot, right?
Yeah, Yep.
Right.
all of our schools. have been
Facilities team does a
happy.
great
We don't-
job. You know, they really do a fabulous job for us, coming in with good projects, and Pat and I take a look at them with them and kind of go through and make sure it balances out for everyone.
I have a question, Mr. Chair. When we look at the needs for the schools, do we differentiate based on if they're empowerment zone or not? Or just?
Yes, we do. So you are only voting on our portion of it. The empowerment zone is contributing money out of their carryover to do the improvements at their schools.
Okay.
We caught that, Latonia.
It's a good question. That's right.
We're on that one.
Any other questions?
Just Pat, briefly, what are the schools that are going to get this $3 million?
We haven't picked the schools yet. Where, the superintendent and I will sit down with the facilities department, and they pick them based on, which schools. It's been a long time since they've been in the cycle, what kind of open work orders we have at the schools, and what kind of upgrades are needed. The types of projects that we do are things that aren't really done as part of the operating budget. They're above and beyond the operating budget, but they don't quite go to the level of what the city would be bonding for, which would be like roofs and windows and things like that. So it's a lot of painting, a lot of
Floor tiles, a lot of floor tiles, things like that. Major facelifts for the buildings when we're shut down.
Thanks very much.
Any other questions? Then a motion to approve spending the $3 million out of carryover for facility improvements is in order. Latonia's waiting for you.
Oh, I'm sorry. So moved.
There we go. Terry, would you call the roll?
Yeah, Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Attorney Murphy,
Yes.
Ms. Naylor.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, the next item will be probably a little bit longer item, and that's a vote to recommend to the full school committee that it approve the FY21 supplemental budget.
So Pat, if you can give us a description on what's going on here.
Sure. So when the school committee voted on the budget last year, you voted based on the governor's recommended budget. Those were the numbers that the superintendent and I brought to you and recommended that we vote the budget on. After around that time's when COVID hit, and we weren't really sure what was going to happen with the final state budget. Well, the final state budget didn't come out until December. So when the final budget was passed, they actually passed a budget that was $17 million less than what the school committee had voted for. So the good thing is that we actually planned for this, so we didn't have to implement any cuts. When in the school committee's original budget, we had the Student Opportunity Act funded and that money going out to the schools. So we had put a freeze on that money, so the schools didn't get to implement those plans. But we've had other expenses like the Quebec team and substitute teachers and lunch coverage, that those expenses didn't happen because of the nature of being remote. And so we're just reducing the line items in those accounts. So there's no cuts being implemented based on this. We've just kind of been able to manage the reduction that's being implemented. So it's really a housekeeping item.
So basically you're moving money from lines like, take Quebec, for example, where we didn't spend anything, and putting it into places where we do need money.
Exactly.
Questions?
I have one question, if I might, about the Quebec team. So we have a contract with them, isn't that right?
We have a contract between us and the police department for services. We've suspended that contract during this time. The police department was happy to redeploy the people, so we're not paying for that service at all until we come back live.
All right. Thank you.
It worked out perfectly for both departments. They have a shortage due to COVID, and we didn't want to be paying for a service we didn't need. And Cheryl was just more than cooperative in saying, let's suspend it. Couldn't have worked out better. It worked out great for us, but also given their numbers with COVID, it would work out well for both departments.
Thank
And
you.
we
That
really-
was my question was
Yeah.
whether we were paying their salaries.
Well, and because we really can't pay for services that we didn't get either, so.
Right, yeah, but
pretty
it wasn't the tussle we used to have
Oh, yeah.
the previous administrations with fighting for every penny. It was not, this is the right thing to do, done, don't worry about it. They were really good about
Thanks
it.
very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none, does someone want to make a motion to approve the supplemental budget?
So move.
Second,
Gary, would you call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Attorney Murphy,
yes.
and Miss Naylor.
Yes.
You. And the last item is a vote to recommend to the full school committee that it adopt the Springfield Public Schools COVID emergency paid sick leave policy, which
Yeah.
we've been distributed. And who wants to talk to it?
So if Mary Jo and Melissa would cover that one for us.
Sure. Do you want me to share the document?
That would be great,
Yes.
Melissa. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa.
Okay, I'm going to just do a quick introductory part and then have Mary Jo jump in. Basically, previously from April through December 31st, there was a federal law that covered this type of leave. It was the Family First Coronavirus Relief Act, the FFCRA. It expired for our purposes December 31st, 2021. So there was a provision in it, and when it was renewed, that allowed private employers to voluntarily extend certain parts of it through March 31st, 2021. So currently there isn't a provision that applies to our employees on the school side to allow them to have COVID leave separate and apart from, their own accrued sick time. So this particular policy, we reached out to the city to be consistent with what they're doing. So this is consistent with the city, what the city is doing, city side is doing. I know Attorney Kennedy coordinated and spoke with Bill Mahoney, as did I speak with Bill as well. And when this was drafted. And this is to provide some relief to our employees and to alleviate any safety concerns that would impact the district in the interim while we're still remote. So if you note, the proposal, I think, is to, it was to extend it through March 31st, 2021. So basically the period of January 1, 2021 through March 31, 2021. It kind of covers a time period where we're a little bit in limbo when you look at, the federal law. So there have been some discussions from what I've seen in the press with regard to the new President Biden administration and some recommendations, but currently there isn't this type of a provision that covers our employees. And Mary Jo, I don't know if there was something in addition that I probably forgot to mention or that you wanted to add.
Yeah, so this leave is limited just to employees who are sick, COVID-related illnesses, or being advised to quarantine due to COVID-related exposure. So as Melissa said, it's a safety issue to provide them with this additional hours of up to 80 hours of an additional leave for that. Now, you'll see in the second paragraph that the policy may be subject to change at the discretion of the Springfield School Committee if there is a federal law enacting that requires different emergency paid leave. And as it is right now, this is as with the FFCRA that was in 2020, which was mandated by federal law. That's why there was no school committee policy for that, because you were required, the district was required to provide that paid leave. This is not required, so that's why we come to you to get permission to do this. But we think that it's a very important thing for safety issues. so that people stay home if they're sick and they don't have to worry about that they've exhausted their other sick leave. But there is this discretion in here that this may be changed, because if there is a federal law that's passed, that leave will be different, and then it will be most likely mandated. And if President Biden's bill is passed, it included, public entities, but also there was some, which is different than the prior bill that was passed. You didn't get a reimbursement or a tax credit, a payroll tax credit like private employers got if they paid out any leave under FFCRA. There's the potential, if this federal bill is passed as it's proposed by the president, that there may be some repayment to the city for that, for any expenses they paid for paid leave. So if that happens, this would then be withdrawn, and then we would then follow the federal law on that. But until then, it provides some protection for employees that they will stay home if they're sick during this time period. It also coincides with that by March 31st, you still will be remote. So it's not going to involve anyone in the building. Majority of people will still be working remotely.
I have a question.
Sure.
With the PFMLA, that's what we call it at my job. How does that relate to paid sick leave in the event that people exhaust their sick time? How is that utilized? I've not figured out anything except that they take money out of my paycheck.
Well, this is not, I'm sorry, I didn't actually hear the question. This is what the city would pay up to 80 hours of emergency paid sick leave for COVID-related illnesses or quarantine.
Well, I guess what I'm asking as a clarifying question, Attorney Kennedy, is the PFMLA that was required.
I'm sorry, that's what I did not hear. Yes.
But yeah, so how does that work? And would that be something that our employees would ever be able to utilize?
Melissa, I believe that applies to all employees. I don't think it,
I guess what I'm trying to understand is, I know we have a pretty generous policy in sick time. I also know that some people have actually taken up to 30 days to recuperate from COVID when they've gotten it. So I know that although 80 hours is a really good amount of time for COVID, it could be the case that somebody has a serious enough issue where they would exhaust this, right? And maybe even exhaust their regular sick time. So I just wonder, how does that PFMLA coincide, or would that be an option if people were to exhaust their hours?
So why don't I respond to this part? So this is modeled to be consistent with what the cities do. The city has the 80 hours. We do have, as you mentioned, we do have generous sick leave and leave benefits. So, so this is separate and apart from a person's accrued sick time, and or for certain groups, they also have vacation. So if they exhaust this 80 hours, but they have accrued sick time, they could utilize that. And or let's say they've exhausted their accrued sick time, but they're an employee that would have vacation time. They could utilize vacation time to cover it. But this proposed policy or is separate and apart from folks' accrued sick time.
And additionally, some of our groups, not all of them, have sick banks.
Yes, they do.
So if they, Latonia, if they happen to run out of their regular sick time, they could go to the sick bank and ask for time from the sick bank. Not all of our groups have it, but a number of our groups do have a sick bank provision in their contract. Where
all of our large unions. Yeah, all of our large unions, you're right. So they have that as well. So they really have some nice protections.
Yeah, I just didn't know, Latonia might not have been aware of that they all donate a day in and there's this big pot.
Right.
And if someone has a condition like that, they can apply to the sick bank and get additional sick days. that's another avenue that our large unions have.
Ms. Naylor, I think you were referring to the Massachusetts Paid Family and Medical Leave. That is a statute that is not, that a municipality, unless it adopts it by a majority vote of its legislative body, is not subject to. So there's been no withholdings of employees, or my understanding is by either employees or by the employer, because they're an exempt. And Pat would know, and Melissa would know whether the city, I don't believe the city has adopted it.
You're correct.
Okay. Does anybody need the screens to be continued to be shared? Okay, thank you. All right, so then I guess, are there additional questions from any of the committee members? I don't see anybody. So is there a motion to recommend to the full school committee that we adopt the Springfield Public Schools COVID-19 emergency paid sick leave policy?
So move.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Terry, would you call the roll?
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Attorney Murphy,
Yes.
and Ms. Naylor.
Yes.
Since this is a new policy, it will only need to be voted on once by the full committee. So it will probably be over very quickly. Having gone through all of the items on the agenda, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I think everybody wanted to stay. Terry, would you call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Attorney Murphy,
Yes.
and Ms. Naylor.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
I know it's
everybody.
tough to stay home, but stay home and stay well.